We are now on Module 4, Part 2, installing the vCenter Server Appliance. In this section, we will talk about the vCenter Server Appliance. But first, we will answer the questions, what is a vCenter Server? And then, what is the vCenter Server Appliance? Well, you know that you can use the vSphere desktop client to connect to Esxi hosts one at a time. And if you only have one Esxi host, it's not a problem. But if you have a large data center with a large number of Esxi hosts, having a separate administrator name and a separate administrator password for each Esxi host is very inefficient, time-consuming, and labor-intensive. That's why we have vCenter Server. vCenter Server allows us to connect to and configure many Esxi hosts from a single login. That's vCenter Server. Now, the vCenter Server virtual appliance, vCenter Server can be installed as an appliance. So what is an appliance? In a typical virtual server setup, the tasks include create the virtual machine, then install and configure the guest operating system, then install VMware tools, then install the application that you want to install. And the disadvantage of that is all those steps can be time-consuming. This is why we have appliances. An appliance is a piece of software that contains a virtual machine and an operating system and an application all pre-installed. So when we install an appliance, we are installing one piece of software, but that piece of software is made up of virtual machine, operating system, and application. If we look at the vCenter Server Appliance, we can see that the components are virtual machine, an operating system, Linux, and an application, that is to say, vCenter Server. And the reason we like the appliance is because it is a simple install. To create the vCenter Server Appliance install DVD, we download the ISO from the VMware website. We go into vmware.com, into downloads, into vSphere, and we've been here before, and we previously downloaded the VMware vCenter Server and modules for Windows. Well, now we are going to select the bottom item, VMware vCenter Server Appliance. So we select that ISO and we download it. And then after we download the ISO, we can burn the ISO to a DVD, and that DVD is the vCenter Appliance Install DVD. Now let's install the vCenter Server Appliance. You take the installed DVD and you put it in the drive of your workstation, not of the Esxi host, of your workstation. And then you first install the VMware client plugin, which is required, and then you install the vCenter Server Appliance. So we go to the Windows File Manager, and there is the DVD that I downloaded and burned, and in the VCSA, vCenter Server Appliance folder, we can see there's the install program for the VMware Client Integration plugin. So I select that, and we see Welcome to the Installation Wizard for the VMware Client Integration plugin. So I click on Next. I accept the licensing agreement, followed by Next. I accept the default installation folder, followed by Next. Click Install to begin the installation. I click on Install, and it proceeds to install the Client Integration plugin. And installation is complete. The VMware Client Integration plugin has been successfully installed on your computer. Now the next thing to do is to run the vCenter Server Appliance installation program, and that is called VCA, vCenter Server Appliance -setup.exe. So we go to the Windows File Manager, and under the VCSA install DVD, we select the install program, which is called vcsa-setup.html. I select that, and I see, do you want to allow this website to open a program on your computer? The program is the VMware Client Integration Plugin. And I say, well, absolutely, yeah. And now we have the vCenter Server Appliance installation program. So I click on Install. And then I accept the licensing agreement, followed by Next. And then I type in the IP address of the Esxi host where I want this appliance to be installed. Then I type the username for the Esxi host, which is root, and then I type the password, followed by Next. I accept the secure hash algorithm, followed by Yes. And then I type the appliance name, and I will give it a name, vCenter Server, for example, and then I will assign it a password, and I will confirm the password, followed by Next. Then I can select Embedded Platform Services Controller or External Platform Services Controller. If I select Embedded Platform Services Controller, then the vCenter Server and the Platform Services Controller, which runs the single sign-on service, will run on the same virtual machine. If I select External, then they will be installed on different virtual machines, and I might select External for a larger organization, but for a small to mid-sized organization, I will select Embedded Platform Services Controller. Click on Next. Then I will select Create a New Single Sign-On Domain. And the administrator, I will type in assign a password for the administrator, and then I will confirm the password. Then I will assign a single sign-on domain, which is typically going to be vSphere.local, and then I will give the site a name such as Site1. Click on Next. Then I select the appliance size, and for a small installation, they call that tiny. That would be 10 to 100 virtual machines, and a large installation would be 1,000 hosts and a potential 10,000 virtual machines. We're just going to set up a tiny installation, 10 hosts and 100 virtual machines maximum, and that will create a virtual machine with 2 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM. Then we click on Next. Then we select the data store where we want to install this virtual machine. There's only one data store here. And then we like to select Enable Thin Disk Load, because remember, when we select Thin Disk Provisioning Method, it doesn't really use up space on the data store until data is saved to the virtual hard disk. So it's a more efficient way to go in the short term. Then we click on Next. We will use an embedded, what they call Postgres database. If I had a very large organization, I might use an external Oracle database, but in this case we will use an embedded database, followed by Next. Then we choose the network, which is going to be the default virtual network. We will be using IP version 4, and we will assign a static IP address. We will assign a static IP address, and then we can specify the fully qualified domain name or just use the same IP address again. Then, of course, we assign a subnet mask, a default gateway, and a DNS server. And typically, we like to synchronize the time of the appliance with the time of the Esxi host. Then we click on Next. Then we see downloading and deploying appliance. And now you can see installation is complete. Your vCenter server is successfully installed. And then after vCenter server is installed, you can connect using the vSphere desktop client, which you are already familiar with, or the vSphere web client. The vSphere web client allows us to manage our vCenter server over the internet. So if we're at a cyber cafe, surfing the internet, and our cell phone goes off and our coworker says, I need you to go back to work to create a new virtual machine, you will say, I don't need to, because I can connect over the internet to the vCenter server. And the vSphere web client also allows me to implement newer features, particularly the virtual hardware version 11. So to install the vSphere web client, we use a browser, Chrome, Internet Explorer, or Firefox. Chrome tends to work best with VMware. We connect to the vCenter server, download and install the client integration plugin if we have not done so already, and then we log on to vCenter. So I go to Google Chrome, and then I type in the IP address of the vCenter server. And then I select log on to the vSphere web client. And then, before I type my username and password, notice on the bottom left-hand corner it says download the client integration plugin. And if you have not yet downloaded the client integration plugin, you click on that and it downloads the client integration plugin, which is required on the browser to interface with the vCenter server. Then I click to initiate the install program. I click on the VMware Client Integration Program, and it launches the Welcome to the Integration Wizard for the VMware Client Integration plugin. And then it says it can't run this program while the browser is running, so I got to close Chrome in the Internet Explorer. So I close the web browser, and then I select Retry. And now I can select Welcome to the Installation Wizard, click on Next. This wizard will install the VMware Client Integration plugin. I click on Next. I accept the licensing agreement, followed by Next. I accept the default location where it will be installed, followed by Next. Then we see click Install to begin the installation. So I click on Install, and it proceeds to install the Client Integration plugin. Installation is complete. The VMware Client Integration plugin has been installed on your computer. Click on Finish. Now, to get to the vCenter server, I select Google Chrome, and then I type in the IP address of the vCenter server, followed by /vSphere client. And this takes me to the VMware login screen for vCenter server. I type in the administrator name, which is not root. It's administrator at vSphere local. I type in the password, then I click on login, and it authenticates me. And now I'm at the vSphere web client homepage, and you can see here is my vCenter inventory list. So now let's do a brief tour of the vSphere web client. Let's look at an existing data center. Let's look at the hosts, the virtual machines, and the VMFS data stores. So I go to the VMware vSphere web client home, and if I click on hosts and clusters, I can see there is data center 1, and here is our Esxi host, which is a Dell PowerEdge with 24 logical processors and 256 gig of RAM. Here is a virtual machine called File Server 1. It's got Windows 2008 Server. It's got 2 CPUs and 4 gig of RAM. If I click on the Monitor tab, I can see that this virtual machine is not working hard at all. If I click on the Manage tab, then I can see that I can add more CPUs, I can add more RAM, I can add more hard disks, and I can add additional network interface cards. If I select on the storage icon, it takes me to the data store, and if we look at this data store, we can see there is lots of free space on this data store, and we can see that of the free space that is taken, how much space is being taken by each virtual machine. In the next section, we will use the vSphere web client to manage inventory, meaning we will create virtual machines. In summary, in this section, we installed the vCenter Server Appliance, and we installed the vSphere web client, which is used to manage the vCenter server inventory. And this concludes part 2 of Module